I went into the WikiLeaks cables, all the diplomatic cables. These include the Kissinger cables from 1973 to 1976, the Carter cables, 1977, 1979, and Cablegate from 2003 to 2010. So this is missing the 1980s and the 1990s. But what I did is I ran a search for Soros, and then separately searches for the Open Society Institute, the Open Society Foundation, the Open Society Forum. And my goal is to create a comprehensive tapestry of all U.S. State Department involvement with George Soros, the Open Society Foundation, the Open Society Institute, and every Open Society spandrel in every country in the world, to create a comprehensive picture of how it is, for example, that Strobe Talbot came to say in 1995 that U.S. foreign policy has to be synchronized. Deputy Secretary of State came to say it's not identical to the foreign policy of the U.S. government, but it's compatible with it. It's like working with a friendly, allied, independent entity, if not a government. We try to synchronize our approach to foreign policy with Germany, France, Great Britain, and George Soros. The magic sauce. And of course, Soros then turns around and is the #1 political donor. And so I began this task, and I'll start the story here. So I began this exercise by seeing all this stuff in 1973. 1973, 1974, 1975. You see, the entire first page is before 1979. So I skipped over it at first. I thought, oh, that must be a mistake. It's got to be a different Soros. So I started, because again, this leaves out the 1980s and the 1990s. So I really started my review at first from 2003 to 2010. And I'll show you some crazy shit. But then, when I was on my way stuck on the way from Miami to Portland, Maine, to do the Tucker thing, I thought, that is an awful lot of George Soros references before 1979. Maybe I should check a couple of them out. It didn't make sense to me, because 1979 is when the Open Society Foundation started. So that is when I had assumed the Soros relationship with the State Department. Why is Soros popping up in so many State Department cables before Soros even started the Open Society Foundation? And I'm about to tell you that story. And then we'll work our way up to Mongolia. The Mongolia story is one of the craziest stories I've ever heard in my life. I've been telling everyone this week about Mongolia. I told Tucker about Mongolia. I was on a date. Told the girl about Mongolia. I couldn't sleep because of Mongolia. But let's tell it in order. So I'm going to show a couple things to you here. This is a Kissinger cable. The cable is called Visit by Brown and Root Executives to Gabon. It's the government of Gabon, I believe. Let me show you this. So here is our map. We are right here in Central Africa on the Atlantic Ocean side port of it in Gabon. This is where our drama begins. And what you will see here is a visit by Brown and Root executives. Now, if you remember, we started off talking about Brown Root. Brown Root is now Halliburton. Halliburton owns Brown and Root. They acquired them. And we brought up this memo. Let me find it. Here you go. This one. The CIA. Let me move this over. This is 1976. 10 years earlier, We just found this out, though, in the full unredacted in 2025. And this is the CIA's reaction to a Ramparts magazine article titled "The CIA's Brown and Root Dimensions." And here we have a visit by Brown and Root, Halliburton. So the CIA's Halliburton dimensions. And what you'll see here is George Rufus Brown and Herman Brown. So there is no mistaking things. Herman Brown, an American businessman and philanthropist with the Brown Foundation, also listed in the JFK files for CIA work, was the co-founder of Brown and Root, a prominent construction and engineering firm. He played the central role in development of the company, which is known for its major work on infrastructure projects, dams, bridges, military installations, offshore drilling, oil and gas. Now, it turns out, in the CIA files, Herman Brown, president and director of Brown and Root, Houston, Texas, president and trustee of the Brown Foundation, Houston, Texas, was granted a covert security clearance approval for work with the Central Intelligence Agency for use as a covert associate under Project LP Coin. So the founder and president of Brown and Root, which became Halliburton, was secretly working as a covert associate with the Central Intelligence Agency as he grew what was then the largest construction, oil exploration, and military construction and infrastructure development company in America. Founder and president of the company, secretly working for the CIA for 13 years. His son, the vice president of Brown and Root, George Rufus Brown, so both Herman Brown and his son, was also granted a covert security clearance for use as a covert associate for work with the Central Intelligence Agency on Project LP Coin. We don't know what Project LP Coin is. And then also granted a provisional covert security approval for him being used in connection with possible use in serving on the board of directors for a CIA proprietary being set up to work in Thailand and Laos, and was issued another covert security approval for working with the CIA from 1965 to 1967. So Brown and Root, one of the top 5 holdings of George Soros, his Soros Management Fund, in the mid-2000s at least, was one of his top 5 holdings. Its creator was CIA. Its president, its vice president was CIA. And here we have that same construction and development firm traveling to Gabon, right here, in 1976. I'm going to read this to you. Brown and Root manager, international sales, Edward Sullivan, will arrive in Libreville. They plan to visit the Santa Clara site to develop estimates for cost of building that facility. They're interested in the Grand Pubara. O'Sullivan is anxious, the Brown and Root vice president, is anxious to meet with President Bongo, as well as any additional Government of Gabon officials embassy may recommend. O'Sullivan has been trying for several weeks to obtain hotel reservations, but without success. They greatly appreciate embassy assistance, locating accommodations. We'll also like interpreter and a rental car. Department recognizes that these requests come at a difficult time for the embassy. However, very strong Brown and Root interest in Gabon projects, particularly Santa Clara, critical competition factors preclude deferral. Company currently plans to go all out for Santa Clara port construction. We know that the U.S. Embassy is under stress right now in Gabon, but you have to help Brown and Root secure this deal with the government of Gabon to acquire this giant port construction project. Brown and Root's Vice President O'Sullivan has just come from detailed discussions with Soros associates to develop background for on-site estimates of construction and costs to use in forthcoming talks with the government of Gabon officials. He's also met with Horsley of Leon Templeson and Sons. O'Sullivan advised Commerce emphatically that Brown and Root wants no relations or identity with the Templeman firm. And FYI, Kissinger. Now, Soros Associates is the group run by George Soros's older brother, Paul Soros. Also a businessman and philanthropist. Soros founded Soros Associates, older brother of George Soros. Oh, that's interesting. I actually didn't know this about the Brazil side. And to Brazil, a report. Soros business interests imports in Brazil. Interesting. Wonder where that is today. I wonder if Bolsonaro had a problem with that. What Lula's relationship with it was. Okay, hold on a second. Let's come back to this. Now, I bring this up. Actually, let me just show you here's the Washington Post obituary of Paul Soros. Paul Soros dies at 87, shipping industry titan and prominent philanthropist. He arrived in 1948 with $17. Okay, in his pocket, how much was in his bank account? He founded his engineering firm, Soros Associates, in 1956 from his home in Connecticut. By 65, he was already worth over $100 million. Then started the Paul and Daisy Soros Foundation, titan of the shipping industry. You know what was really funny? I'm reading Bill Burns' autobiography called The Back Channel. Bill Burns was the CIA director for Joe Biden. And there's a funny incident where he's describing his time in the U.S. Embassy in Russia in the 1990s under the Boris Yeltsin years. And he talks about how every time there was a fire at the embassy, the Russians would come in and, disguised as firefighters, they would plant bugging devices. And when one of the embassy adjunct buildings was built by a Russian construction company, it was pre-bugged with Russian spying devices because the construction and engineering companies in Russia were working with Russian intelligence. And he's teeing them up as, everything, all the crisis relief and humanitarian relief and construction companies in Russia were secretly working with Russian intelligence and bugging everything. And then the next page, it says, and under U.S. Ambassador Thomas Pickering, he inherited a U.S. embassy that had no local Russians working at the embassy, which was a big problem for us to be able to gather intelligence on and make connections with Russian civil society out of the embassy. But fortunately, Yeltsin had rolled back a ban on the U.S. embassy for the past 7 years because of the bugging and spying crisis, where the embassy was bugging all of the Russian infrastructure. And so they got in trouble. They were hiring Russian engineering firms and planting devices in the infrastructure. Then they got in trouble with the Russian government. So the Russian government said, okay, unless you want to get kicked out of the country, you're not allowed to do this anymore. Which makes me wonder, sort of apropos of nothing, given that Brown and Root's president was working for the CIA, its vice president was working for the CIA, its foundation was working with the CIA, and they're a major construction company, were they bugging the infrastructure in these projects for the CIA? Bill Burns, the CIA director, used the term pre-bugged, that these buildings were built, they were constructed pre-bugged for the Russians, and then concedes that the U.S. was doing the same thing. Do you think that's part of the deal, maybe? Do you think when these massive ports are constructed, where there's all this flow through traffic and the Gabon officials are all over it, you think they come pre-bugged from Soros? Open question. Let's keep going. So before George Soros started working with the State Department, 6 years before he started his Open Society Institute, Open Society Foundation, his older brother was already in the game, working with the State Department, bending over backwards to make sure that his older brother secured deals. Now remember, this is during the Cold War. There was an interest in having Westerners control the infrastructure rather than Russians controlling it. There were Russian development firms, Russian construction firms. Africa was tilting towards Russia. A lot of African countries were sympathetic towards communism. There was a big battle over Russia, a battle over Africa with Russia. So you can see a State Department interest in pulling strings out of the embassy with the government to make sure Soros gets the deal rather than the Russians. This gets back to that clip about George Soros admitting on tape, bragging on tape, that the Soros empire was built out of the ashes of the Soviet empire, as he collected all of the assets that the Soviets used to own.
When the Soviet Union, the Soviet empire collapsed, and as the empire collapsed, I moved in and picked up the pieces. First in Hungary in 1984, and then Poland in 87, China in 87 as well. So this is how the Soros empire was replacing the Soviet empire.
And how do you think you're doing in your imperial ambitions?
Here's another example. June 1975, again, still 4 years before the Open Society Foundation was created. Bandar Abbas Port Project. 3 senior executives from the Dravo Corporation out of Pittsburgh. Let's check out this Bandar Abbas project. This is in Iran. Iranian Revolution of 1979 is when we lost Iran. Okay? We couped, the CIA couped Iran, was it 1953? 1953. The US and UK couped the Iranian government out of office. We overthrew Mossadegh. We installed the Shah. And Iran was a US-UK vassal state until 4 years later. At the time, the coup was in large part because of Mossadegh's attempt to nationalize Anglo-British Petroleum, which is today BP, British Petroleum. And what you see here is, while we still had a puppet government that was friendly to the U.S. in Iran, the U.S. State Department is working, as well as the Commerce Department, is working to secure port projects for George Soros's older brother, Paul Soros. Here's what you see. 3 senior executives from the Dravo Corporation visited the Bandar Abbas Port Project. Dravo is part of the Iranian-American Port Consortium bidding on the project. Other 3 members include International Systems, Van Houten Associates, and Soros Associates. Dravo's estimated value of the project is between $700 million and $1 billion. This is in 1975. Action requested. In addition to providing all possible assistance to only American consortium bidders, request embassy ascertain the following. In the government of Iran giving consideration to the American group, has the submission of the bid influenced, favorably or otherwise, their judgment? Here's 1975, back in Gabon, Santa Clara Ore Project. The U.S. ambassador, the head of the State Department, raised with the port director, Damas, question of mineral port design and asked if progress had been made in reaching a decision. Damas, the head of the port in Africa, said that meetings had been held within the government of Gabon and were continuing, which should lead shortly to the elimination of all but a few offers, and that Soros was in very good position. So here is the head of the State Department in the country, Gabon, on the coast, on the west coast of Africa, back channeling with the head of the port to make sure that Paul Soros won the bid, eliminate all of the opposition. Once choice narrowed, Damas said that further discussions would be had with firms selected. He mentioned that one difficulty with Soros' bid was that American specifications differed from Gabonese, i.e. French ones. Ambassador told Damas that he felt sure that this problem could be overcome in further discussion with Soros. Decontrol on receipt. So the U.S. ambassador, already in 1975, 4 years before kid brother Soros, George Soros, even starts the Open Society Foundation, Paul Soros is already getting mucho favors from the U.S. State Department. The U.S. State Department is pulling strings to make sure that competing bids with Paul Soros are eliminated, and encouraging the government of Gabon to go through with the deal, and that the barriers can be overcome to make sure that Paul Soros wins the bid to control the ports of Gabon. Here's again 1975 in Gabon. Recent visit to First National City Bank led to suggestion that Dravo Corporation of Pittsburgh be contracted for construction of Santa Clara Mineral Port. It appears Soros associates virtually certain to get engineering contract for port. Embassy's understanding is that Soros only does engineering, not construction. If this is the case, it obviously is in our interest to find an American firm soonest that wants to do construction. Thus would appreciate any further information on Dravo. So we know Soros has got it locked, but we need someone else to actually do the construction that Soros can then do the engineering on top of. Current status and outlook for Gabon's iron ore. Director General of Semaphore, Gabonese Iron Ore Consortium, called the U.S. ambassador to review the latest developments. This is 1975 in Gabon. The Director General, Dept, stated government of Gabon percentage in Semaphore is now 56, with Bethlehem at 20, French 10, German 10, and remaining 4 split between Europeans. Dept thought government of Gabon would eventually relinquish part of its 56% to attract participation of new iron-consuming partners such as Japan. Dept added that he pleased government of Gabon had and would keep single largest participation, as this would induce favorable treatment of company, i.e. rail tariffs, and reduce chance of nationalization, as well as spread the costs. Dept said plans likely moving forward for construction of the mineral port, and that Soros likely to get the engineering contract for how the iron ore will be exploited. I want to get to the loan part of this. I'm jumping around a little bit, but this is 1973. Soros Associates study. $10 from Bear, 896. Mike's always working. True. Well, there's just so many of these Soros references that I'm having a hard time finding the stuff in my notes. Give me one sec. Ministry of Transport, major project, port consultant, arrival, Paul Soros. So Paul Soros comes to visit, alternative dates, Kissinger, the Gabonese economy. The Gabonese economy. As Embassy is aware, in absence of thorough and reasonable current data on Gabon's economy, Exim Bank has been processing cases for Gabon based on data available and indications that government of Gabon is creditworthy obligor. Loans recently approved on this basis for General Electric locomotives and Soros study financing. So Soros is making loans. As you'll see, there's like a $25 million loan. More on Iran. One sec here. Soros' indicated interest in design on work for, again in Iran. You can already see that the Soros family wants to do the same thing in Iran and Gabon that the State Department want. A major project, let me check out this one. 1974, major project Aero Isla. Soros Associates again, as well as the geological work. I think it was in 1976, so it's a little bit ways down. Senegal, all of these, Soros financing. 1976, still in Gabon. First National City Bank, Libreville, has informed embassy that government of Gabon has accepted completely financing package for the Soros contract. So the government of Gabon cannot afford to pay George Soros. They need to take out a loan to pay George Soros for the contract to construct the port and to extract the iron ore. Subject financing to be provided in the following amounts. Government of Gabon down payment of $500,000, an Exim Bank direct loan of $2 million, a First City National Bank loan, $2 million, 1.5, total $5.6 million, which is the total amount of the Soros contract. Thus, all U.S. portion of Soros contract, $4 million, and local costs being financed by Exim Bank other than the government of Gabon down payment. When the Department of Commerce phoned First National City Bank to call its representative visiting Gabon, instructing to point out government of Gabon has more advantageous terms than the original one, stressing eventual combination Soros contract financing into larger package, including U.S. source construction, and extending beyond 5 years. So not only is the State Department negotiating Soros's deals, helping him secure the deals, they're also back-channeling so that foreign governments can pay George Soros so that Soros makes his appropriate profit on the deal. Now, the Exim Bank, let me show you this, refers to the Export-Import Bank of the United States. This is a U.S. government agency who is working with your tax dollars. So the U.S. government, so think about how many different government agencies are helping Soros Inc. The Commerce Department, the State Department, the Export-Import Bank of the United States. So the Commerce Department is working with the local trade representatives. The embassy is working with the senior leadership of the foreign country. And the Export-Import Bank, with our tax dollars, is loaning out to the foreign government so that they can pay George Soros his money. How far backward over yourself do you need to bend for the government to do favors for Soros Inc.? This is before the Open Society Foundation was ever created, years before it. So when the Open Society Foundation was created in 1979 and then right away hits the ground running, working with the State Department, the Treasury Department, the Central Intelligence Agency. You know, probably didn't just pick it up on the fly. Do you think George Soros ever picked up the phone and called his older brother? Or Paul Soros ever picked up the phone and told his kid brother, hey, you're running a hedge fund in New York City. You're betting on all these portfolio companies. Dude, you gotta work with the government on this. This is where the money is. This is a family business where their deals are secured by the U.S. government. So when they go around and do all of the things that advance what the State Department wants, there is this favors for favors relationship that goes back now 5 decades. More than 5 decades, 52 years, 1973. And those are just the earliest cables we have. WikiLeaks Cablegate archive starts in 1973.